Namaste, dear students. Today we'll discuss global justice, its meaning, concept, and the theoretical understanding of the concept. Let us begin with a hypothetical situation where you meet two persons, one you know, who may be a friend of yours, who may be someone of your extended family or of your neighborhood. Another you don't know at all, and both are under equal misery. Whom would you extend your financial support to? If at all you extend your financial support, the usual answer would be that you will help the one you know, even if you don't expect any kind of return. So the question is why? Why would you help the one whom you know? And if we put this question in a global scale, if we put this question uh, as a community, not just an individual, do we have any role or any responsibility towards those who are under miseries in different and distant parts of the world? That is, the global poor or people in different parts who are suffering from environmental degradations, from famines, from poverty, from health hazards. What is our role as a community, as a global community towards them? This is the question of global justice. In this discussion, we will primarily try to understand the notion of global justice. What do we mean by global justice? Then we'll move on to different theories of global justice, and then we'll try to understand that what are the problems in implementing these noble principles of global justice. And finally, we'll try to understand, is there any idea in Indian context that can be connected to global justice, or is it absolutely an American or West centric theorization towards the problem of global poverty? So to begin with, let us look at uh, the situation in India, that we have built up a society which is largely pluralistic in nature. And in India, we have even the microscopic minorities, religious minorities, who are, forget about any kind of threat to them, they are quite normally and with pride they're performing their religious customs. Like, look at Jews, look at Zoroastrians. They're absolutely fine in India. But is that okay? Is that all we should be okay with? Don't we have any role to play in the towards the miseries of minorities in different parts of South Asia? And that is actually the moral drive towards opting this bill, CAA. We are not just happy to have a plural society inside India, rather, we want minority rights in different parts of South Asia where they are not enjoying any right to life at all. Forget about just right of the minorities. They're facing threats. They're facing threat to their life. And this is we can we can connect with the question of global justice. Look at the problems of West Europe these days. They are accepting migration, and they are accepting migration from politically disturbed regions with the feeling that it is okay, that we have built a good society where there are social justice, social values, rights, and others. So let us extend these values towards those people who do not enjoy these rights in their domestic countries. So they allow people from Syria, people from different other parts of West Asia like Iraq, they allow in their country. So this is a kind of application or implementation of global justice values. More generally, do we the question of global justice is that, is it all enough to confine the values of social justice within the nation state, within our society, or is it really or equally important to extend the values of, or these great values of social justice, considering globe as one community. If we consider the entire humanity as one community, then we cannot really blindfold our eyes and say that let someone die in Tanzania of hunger, let someone die in Pakistan for being a minority, let someone die in some other parts for flood, let someone die in Africa for health hazard. But we cannot do it. With the principles or the great principles of social justice and values, we have to extend some kind of help towards them, not always by including them or inviting them into our own country. They don't always even want to, but we need to solve their problem. We need to extend our help towards them. In other words, the discussion of social justice, it advocates an equilibrium of social wealth or the global wealth in a way that no individual society uh, can get. I mean, sorry. The concern of global justice is all about global inequality. So, to begin with, we must understand this very important uh, conceptual clarity that we should follow the nomenclature of global justice, not just international justice. But you will find in many books that these two concepts are interchangeably used. But uh, actually, global justice is a concept that somehow ignores the preponderance of state in international system, and that is why they prefer global system rather than international system. The moment we say international, we focus on or we give prime importance to nation states, and the moment we say global, we give importance to community, individual, society, civil society, their individualistic problems. So we do not want, in the name of international justice, we cannot afford to have poor people with rich nation states. Our concern here in the study of global justice is to promote uh, a meaningful life towards every individuals, towards every community, not just to all these nation states. And that is why the nomenclature global justice is more preferred than the nomenclature of international justice. Now, before we begin the idea or theory of global justice, we need to understand what are the areas of injustice. First and foremost, what they point out or what they underline is global economic injustice and globalization. Although there are thinkers who consider that this entire injustice, like economic inequality, gender injustice, migration, environmental issues, and health hazards, all these are clubbed together. Look at any pre colonized country, you will find there uh, economic degradation, you will find environmental degradation, you will find health hazard. The question is why? And the answer is they are so poor because of colonization, they need to go for rapid industrialization. In a way, they ignore environment and health. And their economic situation is so poor, so bad that they need to go for migration, even at the cost of their life and livelihood. And gender injustice is there in most of the colonized countries. So the point is, it cannot be argued that in some places there are some kind of environmental degradation and in some places there are some kind of economic injustice. It's usually all these things are clubbed together. So to elaborate the problem of economic injustice and globalization, you see with and what they argue, particularly they target globalization, and they argue that the globalization and its different organs by which it asserts globalization, the major power asserts their uh, policies or programs of globalization. These corporations like multinational corporations, some intergovernmental organizations, all they assert some kind of economic policy by which poor country gets more poor and richer countries get more rich. Next is global gender injustice. We find that in many societies that women are usually the victim of underdevelopment and even the victim of the process of development. You see, one simple issue. If a country or if a society is particularly not that technologically advanced, who has to pay the bigger price of these technological primitive practices? It's usually the women. They cannot afford to go for a job, they have to take care of the household, and it's not the men usually. So global gender injustice is also there. uh, Global environmental issues, we find that in many places we have to go for industrialization even at the cost of a minimum healthy environment, and that causes in a way health hazard. So for example, a few decades back in West Bengal, in a particular place called Nondigram, the government had to agree to establish chemical hub. We all know that chemical hub is usually not established in any developed countries, but why did we have to go for it in the name of development, in the name of so-called industrialization? Because we cannot afford to uh, have a healthy life, because we do not have that much money. Before we move on to the discussion of global justice, we need to find out where the injustices in global context, it exists in global context. The advocates of global justice theory, they argue that primarily it begins with economic injustice, and we find it in environmental sphere, in health hazard, gender injustices are there, along with migration issues. So, if we imagine two pictures of two different societies of the world, one of a Scandinavian or West European country, on the other hand, if we think of an African or any uh, South Asian third world country, we on first image we find a society full of fit people. They're having fresh air for breathing. They're having good bank balance to live. They have all these social facilities like hospitals, schools, etc. On the other hand, the third world country, or in a country of Africa, we find that it's a dense population uh, living under uh, environmental degradation, pollution, very dense population, and not having proper education, sometimes absolute poverty. So why these two are like a package? If you are in a first world country, you have a package of good life, and on the other hand, you have a package of bad life. Why so? The advocates of global justice theory, they argue that this good life and this life of misery are always integrated. Since you have a good economic system and you have ruined those society in a way that you can afford to have a good life. Now, their argument from the time of colonialism, the advocates of global justice theory, they argue that from the time of colonialism, these economic ruining is going on, and you are rich at the cost of my poverty. That is, the first world country is rich, they're having a good health system, they're having good environment, they're having a gender sensitive society at the cost of the third world poverty or misery. Even at the time of globalization, the theorists argue that these did not actually change. The colonial practice of ruining these societies are being replaced by the structure of so-called governance for the globe, globalization or the entire globe. these multinational corporations, World Bank, and all other institutions like IMF, they only serve the purpose of these big first world countries. On the other hand, uh, they destroy the environment of these poor countries, and for which they get into a situation or a condition or a physical environment where they cannot live a healthy, meaningful life. Even they do not have a right to fresh air. That is the biggest problem. The air pollution in most of the countries we find where air pollution is terrible, air condition is terrible, these are essentially backward third world countries mostly. So, next is migration. Migration is an area where stiff injustice we find. Global justice theories, they argue that everyone has a right to migrate to another country. The moment or on what valid ground you can deny someone to migrate into your country? If someone choose to live in this place, how can you deny him to the level that you can kill him or her in the name of security? Or they raise the issue of migrant laborers, their right, their political rights. So these are primarily the area of what they point out as areas of global injustice. Now, to begin with, the theory of global justice, it was first we find in a academic systematic manner in the writing of Peter Singer and his famous paper Famine, Affluence and Morality in 1972. Although before Singer we find the understanding of global justice was also there in the writing of Kant, but this was the first systematic academic understanding. Later, he published a book on this particular issue, that is Practical Ethics and the Life You Can Save. He started his writing or arguing on the backdrop of Bangladeshi famine in 1970s, and his argument was primarily that you can save a society, their members in different countries like Bangladesh who are facing famine, and it can be saved only by the goodwill of those people who are earning better in different parts of the globe. So the argument basically is for poverty eradication of someone or third world country, a person or a community from a first world country should pay, and literally they should pay from their pocket. This was the idea. Later we find Thomas Nagel, who denied or who rejected this model of giving direct doles to people who are under miseries of poverty or something. Thomas Nagel, he wrote a book, The Problem of Global Justice, and he argued that justice cannot be reduced to the level of moral obligation. And he pointed out that whether I want to spend my money for the betterment of a person in Tanzania or for the betterment of a newly born baby in some parts of southern Africa, it's my choice. But he argued that it's not a personal choice, what we know as justice. Justice should be backed by a global system of governance. And he argued that a basic structure of regime or institutions must be built in order to establish justice in global scale. So it cannot be dependent on the vagaries of the individuals or some global civil society, and it depends on when they will feel like giving doles, they will give it, and the rest of the so-called poor people of the world from the global south, they will depend on their whims and fancies. That cannot happen. So Thomas Nagel, he argued that distributive justice at the global level would require a global basic structure. Then only we can talk about or think about redistribution of global wealth. Charles Babbage, he gave an important contribution to the theory of or to the domain of the academic discussion of global justice. He almost argued to replicate the social justice model of John Rawls. His argument was that whatever John Rawls was talking about in his books on social justice, particularly distributive justice, he wanted to replicate it. We will find it interesting that John Rawls was not in agreement with Charles Babbage that the Rawlsian argument can be applied in global parameter, but I'll come to that point later. So Charles Babbage's seminal account of political theory and international relations, that he combined political theory and international relations, and he argued that this redistribution of wealth is possible. And how it is possible, or how it can be established, it can be established through the Maximin principles, through the principle of distributive justice, that those people or those community, those society who are marginalized, who are having minimum resources in their custody, they should be given right to the maximum resources of the globe. This was Charles Babbage's argument, and he argued that Rawls's difference principle should be applied globally. And finally, what he argued, that if you find any so-called natural resource in any particular country within their territory, that particular country or nation state has no moral right to occupy that natural resource, because it belongs to the entire global community, and the poorest of the poor nations should be given right to go and fetch those natural resources. It may sound funny, but this is what he argued from the perspective of global justice. But had it been so, had it could be applied, then the Arabs could not have control over their oil resources, and the Middle East or Central Asia could not control their natural resources. That is going to be very important in coming days. So natural resources are globally free. That is what his argument is. But John Rawls denied or absolutely rejected this model of distributive justice in global level. He argued that this is not possible, and the principles of Maximin or distributive justice or difference principle, these are lofty ideas, but these are having some limitations within the nation state. So in order to meet global justice, or in order to implement global justice, he rejected the idea of distributive justice. Please keep it in mind that John Rawls was not of the opinion to replicate the same model that he provided for social justice within the society or within a nation state. He did not replicate or did not wish to replicate that idea in global level. He said that for global justice, we have to have a procedural format of justice. And what is that procedural format? That nation states, the rich nation states, they should contribute towards forming up of one system of global governance through which they will somehow assist these poor states in order to combat their poverty by institutionalization. This part is very important. He is not in favor of giving some doles or something directly. John Rawls is talking about institution building. And in order to build institutions, the richer states, they can go for joint partnership in business, trade and commerce, and time to time they can invest in that particular country, and if needed give some doles, give some loans. But John Rawls was not of the opinion, like Babbage and others, that rich nations should give doles to poor nations. And John Rawls absolutely rejected this idea and said that it cannot make any country independent, or global justice cannot be brought in that way. Another very important and influential theorist of global justice is Thomas Pogge. Pogge wrote a book on world poverty and human rights in 2008, where he argued that this global poverty is not a local phenomena, and it is absolutely caused by the way global governance, global economic transactions take place, precisely that some parts of the globe, particularly the first world countries, they reach at the cost of the poor people of different third world countries. Uh, it has some similarity with other thinkers, but Poge, what he argued very importantly, that poverty exists due to coercive global order, which includes international monetary fund and World Bank. He uh, criticized so directly, and he prescribed that environmental degradation, and he argued that environmental degradation, mass poverty, malnutrition, starvation are the price that paid by the poor to support the lifestyle or of the standard American or any other first world country. So, this means developed states and multilateral institutions contribute to the persistence of global poverty due to both the way they have structured the international system and how they operate in it. These perspectives indicate that a global problem like poverty requires a global solution that developed countries have both a moral, strategic, and responsibility to address. And he prescribed that there must be global taxation in order to facilitate the global poor and make a way towards an equilibrium in the global community, or considering globe as one society. So finally, he ended with uh, a kind of global governance. Next is an important area where we find that global justice, how do they address the issue of global security, terrorism, and war? It is often we say that war is bad, but we need to understand that usually war is not mutual. There is usually an aggrandizing power and another who is defending it. So, in any case, usually the half of the participants in a war is not really willing to uh, wage a war. So, in that case, is that bad enough? Or intervention, is it always bad? Global justice theorists, they argue that no, it's not like that. There are some areas of intervention. At some point of time, one country should intervene in another country. Why? Because from the very beginning, global justice theorists have argued that no country is an isolated phenomena. We cannot just say that it is their internal affair, so I will put a or blindfold in my eyes. That will not happen. Humanitarian intervention is fine. Like following this particular theory, it is absolutely okay for India to intervene in East Pakistan on humanitarian ground. What our former Prime Minister Indira Gandhi argued, that it is also our internal concern, but it is also a humanitarian crisis there in Bangladesh at that point of time. The way they were torturing the Bangla speaking people, the way they were torturing, raping their women, it was a humanitarian crisis. So India intervened from a humanitarian angle. So intervention is absolutely okay if it is humanitarian. Next is they support the idea of just war. If the war is fought for a just cause, it is okay. I mean, they are not always against any kind of war. But they argue that it is not legitimate to use force against civilians, or sometimes this kind of collateral damage is okay, that happens in every war, but deliberately you should not target non-combatants. Or deliberately you should not kill those people just because of having some nationality, particularly what we see in case of Israelis. They are being targeted everywhere in different parts of the world just because being Israeli or Jews. So this is what global justice theorists would definitely disagree with. Next, combatants may only use the force necessary to achieve their ends. The force used must be proportional to the ends that are to be secured in concluding the war. They do not really support the logic of deterrence. The logic of deterrence is, if you attack me, I'll fight back with a larger magnitude. That global justice theorists do not really support. They argue that if there is no WMV, weapons of mass destruction, are introduced in that particular war, then you should not, fight back with that particular weapon. So there should be a similarity of weapons in a particular warfare. So this is what they largely argue, and terrorism, particularly, they approach terrorism from a softer angle. They often try to justify the causes of terrorism, why some people are being terrorist and what were their cause in order to become a terrorist. So it's not always like the realists. They strongly disagree with any kind of terrorist actions. They are largely sympathetic to the rise of terrorism, and they say that, look, you cannot just brand or label them as terrorists just because they are fighting one established nation state. They can be sometimes a freedom fighter, but let me do not get into that debate. Next, what we can try to understand here is, finally, that these are lofty and excellent ideas, but why there is no application or implementation of global justice in any nation state, particularly because it is nation state. And global justice always talks about that nation states are not that important in implementing the global justice principles. Now the question is, if nation states or governments, they are not the one who will implement this, they are nobody, absolute nobody, then who will implement it? The global governing institutions like World Bank or IMF or UN, they have, in a realist sense, they have no authority to do it. And global justice theories, they also are not really very happy with the modus operandi of the so-called global institutions. Now the question remains that who is going to implement, and the question is how they are going to implement it, what will be the procedure. Global justice theories, they are absolutely silent on this issue. Poge has talked about taxation, global governance and all these things, but here too it's very confusing. It's not really very clear that on what authority they can do it, and whether nation states can be accommodated into this joint program or something. They can ignore about nation states, but the reality is nation states are really very important. Next is global governance that they talk about. Is that really possible? And if that is possible, don't we get into more towards a West-centric world? I mean, why a man in Iran or in Iraq or in Somalia will abide by the words of somebody who is sitting in West Europe or in America? So in the name of global governance or global justice, is it not all about West centricity and Anglo-American culture, assertion of West centricity? The next question remains that how we can redistribute this global wealth. Say for example, I am creating or establishing a chemical hub in some part of India, being an American entrepreneur. Now how can I repay it to the people of India? I can repay it in terms of money, but in that case the question is, can I treat the cancer with a it's like treating the cancer with a band-aid. How can I pay money in return of polluted air, is that money good enough, and whom to pay? If paying to government is enough, then this entire logic of global justice becomes a flaw. I mean, that doesn't work. Becoming a rich state and becoming a rich people are not same thing. Next is there any kind of Indian contribution? Yes, in our ancient texts like Srimad Bhagavad Gita, there are some talks about the entire world as one yagga, that is one system, and we should all take care of that particular system. We should be careful and committed for this redistribution. But in other ancient texts, these are largely missing. In modern times, we found Amartya Sen, Neera Chandoke, and most importantly, we have found Akash Singh Rathod, who has talked about deep parochializing the concept of global justice, and they have contributed and they have remodeled this idea of global justice from the perspective of India. I will upload this study material to the website, and if you want to read further in detail, you can surf the website. Thank you.